Hey guys, I actually have a deck profile for you. Now, this is my Dark Scorpion deck profile. Now, I know you're probably thinking, why Dark Scorpion? Well, that's because Dark Scorpion happens to be one of my favorite archetypes, and I was kind of sad to see it didn't get any love with the release of Primal Origin like some of the other older archetypes. Although, I was looking around and I have found some cards that have helped this deck greatly. And those include Pum Princess, Doble Passe, and Ghost of a Grudge. These three cards have helped immensely with the deck. And so I did some edits to my old one, and I thought it would that I should show you guys. So I actually run Alec Elector, the Sovereign of Birds. If you don't know what he does, you can special summon him if your opponent controls two or more monsters with the same attribute. And also, once per turn, you get to target one card on the field and its effects are negated during that turn. Now, you may be wondering, well, why is that good? Well, I do have Silvoid Calcos. I know I have a full extra deck, but I run Silvoid Calcos because the deck doesn't really need an extra deck, since you really can't go into it very often. But when you do, it can be good. But anyway, back to Elector. You get to target a face-up card, which means if you summon it and your opponent, say you're facing Bujins, you can summon it. Say your opponent has Kaiser Colosseum. You have no Dark Scorpions on board. You can summon Elector, negate the effects of Kaiser Colosseum, and proceed to summon your Dark Scorpions as you wish. So he can be a pretty good card, and also with Seal of Orichalcos, he becomes a 2900 point monster and is the strongest monster in your entire deck. Next up, we have Chick the Yellow. Since a lot of people don't know what Dark Scorpions do, I am going to read off what they do. All of them have effects when they inflict battle damage. There is a fifth one, well, technically a fourth one. Dom Zalug is considered part of the archetype but does not share their name, so he can't be added with like main name, but we'll get to that later. But they all get effects when they inflict battle damage to your opponent. Chick's effects, you get to choose one, or you can either target one card on the field and return it to the hand, or look at the top card of your opponent's deck and return it to either the top or bottom of the deck. Next up, we have Cliff the Trap Remover. His abilities are he can either destroy one spell or trap card on the field, or send the top two cards of your opponent's deck to the graveyard. So, it's an interesting archetype. There aren't very many archetypes that there are a lot of archetypes that do things when they inflict battle damage, but there are fairly few archetypes that do things to your opponent when they inflict battle damage. Most of it will do stuff for you, such as Watts would usually add, but they do have stuff that does things to your opponent as well. So they can be considered a similar archetype because you're wanting to inflict battle damage. If you can't inflict battle damage, you can't do anything in the decks. Next, so there's Chick, Cliff. Next up we have Mene. I call her Mene. When she inflicts battle damage, you can add a Dark Scorpion card from your deck to your hand, or target one Dark Scorpion card in your graveyard and add that target to your hand. And what really annoys me is Don Zalug does not share their name, so he's the only part of the deck that's unsearchable. Next up we have the Dark Scorpion Burglars. Most of you probably will recognize this card from, what was it? The Jackpot 7 build. don't remember who used it, but they just attacked into, they creature swapped it and attacked into it, so that way they could send all their jackpot 7s to the graveyard. And then we have Don Zalug himself, and his two effects are you can discard a random card from their hand or send the top 2 cards of their deck to the graveyard. And he happens, except for, here, I'll show you the last one. Dark Scorpion. Here's the last one. Gorge the Strong. He's level 5, which is the reason I don't use him, and he only has 1800 attack and 1500 defense. What he does, you can target one monster your opponent controls and return it to the top of the deck if he inflicts spell damage. So it's not that he's a bad monster, he just happens to be really hard to get out at level 5. And his other effect is you can send the top card of their deck to the graveyard. And lastly, Pum Princess, Princess of Ghosts for monsters. When it's destroyed while face up in the monster card zone, you can move it to the spell and trap card zone as a continuous spell instead of sending it to the graveyard. And while it's treated as a continuous spell, you get to place pumpkin counters on it during each standby phase. And for each pumpkin counter, all monsters your opponent controls will lose 100 attack and defense. So the longer they are on the field as a spell or trap, the harder it becomes for your opponent to combat your Dark Scorpions. Next up we have Allure of Darkness. Most people know what this does. Burden of the Mighty isn't really seen as much anymore because a lot of people play XYZs and it doesn't affect them. But each face-up monster your opponent controls loses 100 attack times its own level. I have Dark Hole, 3 Mystical Space Typhoons, Reinforcement of the Army, since I forgot to mention this, but all of the Dark Scorpions are warriors, including Mr. Gorge over here. And a Seal of Orichalcos. Now, the reason for the Seal of Orichalcos is this was not originally a deck that had an extra deck in the first place. I made this deck long before XYZs were out, and I didn't put them in immediately after they came out. And then we got Seal of Orichalcos because we had Seal of Orichalcos. So I thought it would be a good idea not to put XYZs in, but I did wind up putting XYZs in, and the main reason for this is because I would have people quit, actually. I would have people quit on me because they thought I was playing Exodia or something like that because I had no extra deck. So it made me really mad because people would just quit on me when they saw I didn't have an extra deck and was using 40 cards. Next up we have Bottomless Trap Hole, called the Haunted, to bring back your Don Zalug. And then we have Double Passé. Now, I was really psyched about this card because my 2 main decks are Ghostrix and Gladiator Beasts, and I'm planning on building Shaddolls. Well, in Gladiator Beasts, this card is very good. It's essential. I don't want to say it's Magic Cylinder. What should I say it is? Well, it acts like a mixture of Magic Cylinder and there's some other card. I just can't remember the name off the top of my head, but it lets your opponent attack you directly instead of your monster. So it's basically a mixture of those two. What it does is when your opponent declares an attack involving a face-up attack position monster you control, you can make it a direct attack. Your opponent takes the same amount of damage you do, and then the monster they were trying to attack can attack them directly next turn. So you do take damage, unlike Mirror Force, but it allows your Dark Scorpions to attack directly without having to deal with monsters. Also, I use 2 Phoenix Chains, 2 Mirror Force, and I run 3 Vanity's Emptiness, which prevents special summoning but if I use another card or one of my cards goes to the graveyard, such as Double Passe, it'll go to the graveyard too. But it's worth it to force them to go to the battle phase without doing any of their special summoning or anything like that. Plus, Mane the Thorn, I would like to say one thing. She has 1800 defense. So if your opponent attacks into her while she's set with, say, a 1600 point monster. If your opponent attacks her with a 1600 point monster, she will flip, your opponent will take 200, and you will actually get her effect because it's considered as her inflicting damage. Now, Ghost of a Grudge, I found this card very interesting, but it would be kind of hard to use. Because your opponent needs 8 or more cards in their graveyard to activate it. Now, this may not seem like it's hard, but if your opponent knows you're playing it, it can actually be really hard to pull off. I've had games where I've had Ghost of a Grudge dead the entire time. But it can be really worth it because it permanently puts the attack of every monster your opponent controls to 0. It never wears off. I actually have a couple of screenshots from duels I won. This is someone I met while dueling. He was playing a Dark Magician deck. I did ask for decks that weren't really competitive because, I mean, I did make it so it can be competitive, but I'm trying to work out some kinks by playing milder decks first. And game 1, I win by Double Passe. As you can see over here, he attacked with Dark Magician. I flipped it. I took 25, and he only had 2250 left because he activated Dark Magic Curtain, which, if you don't know what that does, you pay half your life points to special summon a Dark Magician from your deck. I did play game 3 with him. Game 3, I forgot to screenshot before we started messing with our cards and everything. But game 3, I didn't draw into any of my Dark Scorpions, and the only one I drew into, I used Allure of Darkness to try and get to at least another Dark Scorpion, but I didn't. And it would have been 5 turns, and I wound up exiting out because, well, I didn't exit out, but I surrendered because he activated Dark Magic Attack and destroyed all my spells and traps I was trying to use to keep myself alive. Next up, we have this is Duel 3 with the same guy. He did switch decks. He switched to his Guardian deck. And as you can see here, he used Creature Swap to give me this. This is actually a Scapegoat token. And he also summoned Plasma over here. And equipped my Chixie Yellow. As you can see here, I have Seal of Orichalcos on the field. And once again, I win by Double Passe. It is one of my favorite cards. And it deals effect damage to your opponent and will allow you to attack with your Dark Scorpion. So it is a very good card. Oh, and if you're wondering what this was a Mirror Force. So it didn't really matter it didn't really matter what he, like, if he had unless he had 2 MST, it wouldn't have mattered in regards to the duel. And even if he had finished, I had Elector and would have been able to summon it because he had 2 darks on his side of the field. So there was that. And yeah, that's pretty much it. The deck works by trying to weaken your opponent's monsters or using cards like Double Passe to attack them directly. It's basically you just want to overpower your opponent so you can inflict battle damage and get their effects off. So I like the deck. You don't have to. You can also vary from what I've done. But I rather like the build I have. And Elector is mainly just in there to be a beat stick and get rid of troublesome effect cards. So this is my deck, and I will see you guys for some more Pokemon later. Bye.